Hey gamers, move over podcasting and watch out Chippendales because I'm making my debut as world-class adult entertainer Rudy Rough Knight. Welcome to RPGaymer Season 4, Episode 3, a podcast about the Wild Arms series. I was listening to someone's stuff today, and just like I forgot Rudy's last name is Rough Knight, and that's like the most porno name I've ever heard in my entire life. So I could not pass up on that. But like, welcome back to another episode of RPGaymer. As you can see with me today, we are doing a video episode, and I am graced by the presence of DavidVinc, which I'm pointing to the left. I don't know where he's going to be when we actually do this. Welcome, David.
Hi everybody, how are you doing?
And Corbin is back from Gaming Broductions.
Going on, guys? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you might be the inspiration for this episode from the last time that you were on here, because you talked about how much you love the Wild Arms series. So I was like, that bitch is going to be here for this episode. Like, it is going to happen. And David, you play all RPGs, so of course you're here.
I play all the RPGs.
You play all
the RPGs. But I haven't played Wild Arms in a hot minute. I will say that much. So if he's like some sort of Wild Arm expert, he's going to cream me in the trivia. Although I
wouldn't say I'm an expert. I know more about the first three games, specifically the first two. I feel the third kind of as well. Fourth and fifth, I have played, but I'm not like that crazy about them. I do like them, but they're not. I don't hold them in the same regard as I do the first three.
Well, some might say that I'm pretty wild about them. Actually, I think that's a really good thing that I want to start with. You guys are already there. I kind of want to hear, when did this series first enter your life, and what kind of impact did it have on you? Because I think we're relatively the same age. I think Corbin, you're a little younger than me, and then David, you're just a little older than me. So I'm curious, like, what was going on in your life at the time when this game came out, and I guess the first one, and what kind of impact did that first initial game have on you?
Okay. I was in high school whenever the game came out. It came out in 97, I believe.
Yeah.
And it came out before Final Fantasy VII, but I didn't get a PlayStation until that Christmas of 97 after Final Fantasy VII came out, because I didn't need a PlayStation. I was still getting games on the SNES, blah, blah, blah. Lufia 2 had just come out, all this kind of stuff. So I got a PlayStation for Final Fantasy VII, and then I went to the mall, and I saw like a bargain bin. And it was sitting there in the bargain bin for like $5. And I was going through and I saw it, and I saw Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero. And I saw Beyond the Beyond and Suikoden. And I picked all of them up for like $5 each. And
hey, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Anything about it. I didn't know really anything about it at all, but I loved it. I loved it. It was great. Absolutely great. Loved it. Yeah. Sophomore in high school, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
97, yeah.
Corbin, how about you?
So I actually didn't play the first Wild Arms until a little bit later. I was a little bit younger at that time, like in 97, I was like 6 or 7. So my first introduction to the series was Wild Arms 2, actually. It was probably one of my first 5 or so RPGs I ever played. So I was like very new to the genre. And it was at that time, might have been my favorite one that I played out of the small handful. And I liked it so much, I wanted to go check out the original, see where it all came. So probably a couple years later, maybe a year or 2 later, I went back, found the original in a store. The guy brought it up on the CRT TV for me to like test out in person, made sure it like worked and all that. And yeah, just brought it home and fell in love with it also.
Yeah, like truly, there's just something magical about this series that we'll kind of get into the throes as we go. For me, it's kind of similar to you, David. I played Final Fantasy VII before I played this game, even though it just came out. I think I was in the 7th grade, maybe 8th. So this was a hard time in my life because my parents had just separated and my mom had moved to the United States. And one of the ways my mom would like try and keep tabs with us is she would send us gifts. So she sent me Wild Arms 1, the player's guide, and these like gummy cinnamon hearts. And I just have this like really vivid memory of like all of these things. And I was a huge RPGer at the time. Like even like I had pretty much any RPG before I had played. But there was something really special about Wild Arms for me. And I think it was just kind of like that first full package game that really had a lot of elements that we love seeing in current RPGs that also like we weren't seeing in some of the RPGs prior to it. But immediately was the Western take. I thought was so cool. And that's kind of where I want to move the conversation now is like, what are your thoughts on making something like things that you would think conflict merge together? And this could be across the full series of Wild Arms or just specifically in that first game of including a Western theme in it.
Can we back up for one moment?
Oh yeah, go right ahead.
Talk about the strategy guide that came with Wild Arms.
Well, let's.
Because if I recall correctly, it was one of the worst strategy guides that was ever made in existence. It was horrible. Although it wasn't as bad as Final Fantasy IX strategy guide.
No.
It didn't actually tell you what to do anything. It just was like, here's a picture, and then go to this picture, and then this picture, and then this picture. There wasn't like maps of dungeons. There wasn't like, here's the treasures that you need to find. There wasn't anything like that. It was just like a picture flowchart, if I recall correctly.
I think it was a wall of text. I think
was it that black and white one you're talking about?
Mine was purple on the cover, and
give me 1 second.
Yeah, see, you go look. We'll talk. We'll fill the space.
Mine had color on the cover. It's just like when you actually opened up the pages, it was all like black and white and like a lot of text, kind of like you were saying. It basically just like described what to do. Like, oh, go to this part, go left. It was like a game FAQs walkthrough kind of in like strategy guide form.
Yeah, that's what I had, where it was like almost prose in the way that it described everything, where the writer would kind of like leave a little bit of like thoughts on it. That's not the one that I had.
Yeah, that's actually a different one than I had too. Okay, I've never even seen that one.
Picture flow chart.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
So terrible.
That's interesting, David, because I mean, like, it's completely different than the one that we had. So, are your headphones still, by the way?
So did that come with the game?
No. I don't know. Whenever I picked this up back in the day, obviously it was $14.95 by Dimension Publishing.
Who made that?
But Dimension Publishing.
Who made that strategy guide? It's not like Prima or anything, right?
No, apparently Dimension Publishing, which I've never heard of.
Yeah, I think the one that we had was Prima, wasn't it?
I think so.
That's cool.
Yeah.
The Wild Arms does have some like cool like concept art or whatever, some cool early artwork that they have, and like the credits and various media like that.
Right. Well, so okay.
That one and the Grandia strategy guide were both done in that picture flowchart way that was god awful.
Just late.
I never had that one either, actually.
You're lucky.
I noticed
Sounds like
there's this kind of like split on players guides at the time, because I know there were 2 Final Fantasy VII players guides that came out, and there was one that was very similar to that where it was just a lot of images and information, but then there was one where it's like this one independent person wrote it, and it was very like informative and again like reactive to the narrative in their the guide as well, where like the gamer put their kind of thoughts in it. I thought that was kind of a unique spin on some of the guides that came out around that time, where like you know it's not just information, but like this person is taking their time to process what's going on. They're playing the game too.
There was multiple ones. I think there was like 3 or 4 of them, because I remember I bought one and my friend Johnny bought one, and he brought his to school whenever that came out, and I looked at his and I was like, yours is different. And his had a step-by-step guide on how to get a gold chocobo. And I took it to the student center and I made a copy of his how to get a gold chocobo thing, and I still have that copy in my strategy guide from 1997. It's still sitting inside of my strategy guide, just folded up, my little copies that I made from his, because his was better than mine.
I forget which FF7 strategy guide I have. I know I have one of them. Yeah, you have like all your stuff like right there. It looks like most of my stuff's at my parents' house, which I'm not at. I'm at my apartment. So I have like some stuff here, just not the bulk of everything, I guess.
I would have my stuff if I didn't leave my stuff at my parents' house because one summer I came home and my mom decided to purge everything that she thought was like unimportant. So everything, all of my players' guides got sold. Like that Wild Arms one, a Final Fantasy one, well, a bunch of Final Fantasy ones. I had this really unique Final Fantasy VI players' guide. Like all kinds of really cool things are just like gone because of her. So thanks, Mom giveth and she taketh away.
My parents never did anything like that because my mother would always tell me horror stories about how whenever she turned 16, Amy, her younger sister, got to keep all of her toys, and she was so pissed about it, and blah, blah, blah. I never heard the end of this, so she never took my stuff or anything, so I was really happy about that. She's 70 years old, and she still goes on about what her mother did to her when she was 16, so you just never forget about this stuff, you know?
That's like pretty similar to my parents. They were always really good about not throwing away stuff either, because I guess my grandma threw away my dad's baseball card collection when he was young, and he's still like bitter about that. So he's like, I don't want to do that same thing to you guys. I didn't want to throw away any of your guys' old collections.
My mother goes on about this one Barbie doll. Oh my god, I've heard this Barbie doll story a million times.
Well, hey, at least you have parents that respect that.
Yeah.
True.
So, before David rudely interrupted me, I believe that I want to talk about like the Western take on this, because I feel like all RPGs up to this point were like high fantasy or sci-fi, and we didn't really deviate. Like if we did, we rarely did, but we didn't really deviate. And now we have a series that is just so thematically Western. So like, what was your thoughts on that? Whether this is across the entirety of the series of what you played, or just that one specific intro game that you played?
I personally really enjoyed it, because it was just so different from anything else that I played. You know, at the time, like you said, everything was high fantasy. Even just playing Final Fantasy VII and having that be kind of technological was a huge departure from many of the RPGs at the time, because if you look at the RPGs in the SNES, it's pretty much all medieval. The only one that really went sci-fi was Phantasy Star on the Genesis. And
that's what I was about to say. Yeah. Phantasy Star 4, very, very.
You know, it was all medieval all the time. So to see a Western take, kind of even like a modern Old West, like 1800s take, was so new, so different at the time, and I really, really did enjoy it. Although I did not enjoy the Western take in Wild Arms 3.
Oh,
we'll get to that later.
Too much.
So
we'll get that in a bit.
I'll pivot and say, like, I think the games that leaned more heavily into the Western themes, specifically Wild Arms 3, to me were the games that were the most successful, where I think some of the games that blended, like 2 and 4, I feel like they had a little bit less of an identity, because I mean, like, sometimes it was there and sometimes it wasn't. So I think like 1, 3, and 5 for me, just seeing that like true West, I really, really liked. But what about you, Corbin?
So I really love the Western setting for sure. I didn't have as much, I think, experience with RPGs as you guys did at that point, so I probably couldn't appreciate the difference in like setting as much. But with that said, I did still like it. I've always kind of been fascinated by like just Western aesthetics and kind of stuff like that. And Trigun was an anime I was pretty like big into back in the day.
Very Trigun vibes.
Those so gave me a lot of those vibes for sure. And like I think it wasn't until later that I came to fully appreciate how like kind of different Wild Arms was. You know, just it was like kind of a huge branch out from like setting compared to like you said, most other SNES games. Even the PS1 RPGs up until that point really were pretty standard fantasy, like Beyond the Beyond, and stuff like that. So I really do like the setting.
Speaking of,
even whenever you're playing like a medieval RPG, there's normally like different towns that have different settings. Like you have your Japanese town, you know what I'm saying? There's always that one Japanese town, but there was never like a Western town. So to have the entire game be Western, it was really just groundbreaking.
Yeah,
it was a really good switch up. The only one I can think of off the top of my head was didn't Live Alive kind of have like a Western scenario?
It did, but at the time it wasn't even translated yet. Yeah, so
Yeah, that's true. True. That's probably the only Western RPG I can think of before Wild Arms that attempted that
because
aesthetic.
Live Alive wasn't translated until I was in college. I know I played this one in high school.
Corbin's trying to get us to fight because he brought up the hot word "live alive," which David and I, you probably don't know it's Corbin, but David and I thought about it when we did our last episode together.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the taboo word.
fight about?
That he said it's a
like
terrible
it.
game, and I said I appreciated and enjoyed what it attempted to do.
I did not appreciate
Fair enough,
nor enjoy it.
So
Difference of opinions. Yeah.
the obvious word Western is like what you could use to describe Wild Arms, like Old West Western, not like Western RPG and like what we would think of that term today. But what is like another word that you would use to describe the series? Like for me, if I had to think of it, the big word that I would use would be interconnected. Kind of like Final Fantasy, how we have this like across the series names that are being reused but that might be twisted for different characters, or characters reappearing, like Crimson Nobles are a constant theme since like 2 on, whether that's in storybook form or a playable character or a villain. Like I kind of liked how we had this series that really wanted to make you feel like you were a part of a universe, as opposed to just kind of like none of these games have to do anything with each other. But like, what would you guys use to describe the series aside from Western?
I really like where you went with that, how it's all interconnected. Because if you look at a Dragon Warrior game, besides like the first 3 games, they're not all that interconnected.
No.
Final Fantasy, different. You know, there's not a lot of series that really reward the player for playing them all. I guess the Trails series, you know, that's interconnected, but that's like so story heavy.
Yeah,
it's like a whole other beast. But while
that's like
traditional.
linear,
Yeah, I mean that's almost visual novelty. We're at that point, with the Trails series.
Wild Arms is like loosely connected and stuff like that.
It's loosely connected. It's kind of like Final Fantasy's loosely connected insofar as you have airships and chocobos and things like that, but not like Wild Arms, where everything takes place on Filgaia. I guess you could say Phantasy Star maybe was like that, because it.
Well, they are.
Yeah, that was like a timeline.
Yeah, that is a
the
timeline
Alpha
too.
Star system.
Yeah.
But honestly, like I would just think a classic, but also a lost series, a series that a lot of people nowadays, I guess the younger gamers, just don't know about, or don't appreciate it, because it has been lost ever since the HD era, which is very unfortunate. We are getting another spiritual successor, which we will get to later on, but to me it's just an unfortunate lost series that needs to be revived, and it's a complete classic, and I love it.
Agreed.
I don't know what word I would use, but I did always appreciate how a lot of the games would have multiple characters to kind of start off and play as. So you kind of get your intro like chapter.
Yeah.
And that was the only series that kind of really did that, as far as I know. I mean, to that degree, I guess.
Except for Live Alive again.
Live Alive, and I guess Suikoden 3 had a little kind of chapter system.
That's true.
But that was like a different approach to it.
Yeah, that.
But yeah, Wild Arms
approach
was
something else. Yeah.
Yeah, that's mixed feelings about that. But yeah. The way Wild Arms did it, though, I liked it because it made like the first 3 characters kind of feel like their own main character in like their own way. So you kind of have like 3 protagonists, kind of, and I thought that was just a cool kind of touch. It kind of allows you to learn a little bit about that character's backstory before they join. That way, you kind of get some context, getting the whole group together. So yeah,
I do wish that they did do that more in 4 and 5. Your kitty wants to get out. I see her suffering back there.
I know. Sorry, I'm gonna go.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I really did like the scenario system. I mean, the first time that we, as JRPG gamers, saw the scenario system was back in Final Fantasy VI, whenever it split right there. But for them to actually take that and use it, rather than just a small thing like Final Fantasy VI did, and use it for the introduction of the game to introduce the various protagonists, I really did think that that was a great use of that system. And I do wish that more games did do that, because it lets you know more about the characters as individuals rather than as party members tagging along with the main protagonist. You actually get to learn their individual personal origin story.
I'm happy that you brought that up too, because I like this idea of how, I mean, I don't think you can ever specifically say, unless you do the research, this game has impacted the development of this game. But I think if we're just kind of comparing trends and whatnot, you can hypothesize and whatnot. And I like thinking of that. Maybe these later games were a little bit inspired by this. Like, I could say something like, I think Wild Arms might have been inspired by Lufia 2 or The Legends of Zelda because of the heavy focus on puzzle elements and whatnot, and like the tool system of Lufia 2 you kind of see appearing in this game. But do you guys feel like there are other places that Wild Arms potentially had an influence on other games? And again, hypothetical, like I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
There are things that I wish had more of an impact
Sure.
on the gaming series. Things like the Crest Magic system. I really
cool.
liked the Crest Magic system. And no other game has really done that, you know? It's just so niche, and I know that you probably don't agree with me, Corbin, but I love the Hex battle system. I think that's a great take of the turn-based battle system. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it wasn't done as well in 4, but it was really done very well in 5. You know, there's some other things that I do wish, like the encounter cancel system. Why don't more RPGs use something like that, you know? But I didn't really see it influencing too much of the genre. It took a lot of really good ideas from other games, like you were saying, Lufia 2, Legend of Zelda, and it incorporated it into its own universe, but unfortunately, it didn't seem to influence other RPGs as a whole too much. At least that's my take.
Yeah. That'd be cool.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I kind of piggyback off what David said. I did really like the encounter system and how you can cancel that and kind of have those points you saved up, and kind of like a risk reward element of choosing to save that or choosing to avoid that encounter now, but then you might have to be forced into one later when you're low on health. And I wish more games would utilize more creative ways to go about random encounters. I feel like there's a lot of potential there, other than just, doing the whole standard walk for 10 seconds, get into a battle. There's nothing wrong with that. I just think there's like different approaches developers could kind of go about that basic concept.
Yeah, so we did an episode on encounters last season. We had Aidan Moher, who's an author of like a run fight magic novel he wrote about like the history of RPGs in the West and whatnot. And one of the things we talked about in that episode was a lot of JRPGs, especially back in the day, did not respect the player's time. No. Because the experience could get so bogged down by random encounters. And one of the things I brought up in that conversation was you had series like Wild Arms where once you hit 2, now we're super respecting how encounters are done because of the migrant seals and encounter blocking and whatnot, because all of a sudden, like I can get through a full dungeon and I don't have to fight anything if I'm just even going back through to find something. And that is great because it doesn't feel like, oh, everything is a chore all of a sudden. Like I can actually get into the throes of enjoying this game a lot more if I'm like hunting for enemy skills for someone, or if I miss a treasure chest or something like that.
Plus, like the Wild Arms series is very big on puzzles, and no one likes to solve a puzzle when you have to worry about a random encounter triggering like every other second. You want to solve that puzzle, just do that, then move on to the next part of the dungeon.
Yeah, there are very few games that like encounter block in a puzzle arena or a puzzle area, right? Like most of the time developers keep it in. You're like, why did you do that?
Yeah, right, a lot of times it doesn't. So that I think that's to piggyback. What made Lufia 2 so great was that because the encounters were on screen and they weren't random, you could either clear them out and then deal with the puzzle, or just avoid them or whatever, and deal with the puzzles on your own. And I think that they tried to, in the first game, they were like, oh yeah, Lufia 2, let's put puzzles in and all this kind of stuff, but they didn't realize that it's kind of incongruent with the random encounter system. And then they fixed that going forward in the other Wild Arms games, to their credit.
I mean, hell, in Wild Arms 2, so I just recently platinumed that for the the PlayStation release. Like, they added trophies to it and whatnot. And in Wild Arms 2, they even have an encounter symbol for when an enemy is a new encounter, which is like, I never even thought of that before, because if there's a monster that you haven't even seen yet, the game's letting you know, hey, you're about to get an encounter with a new monster. And, like, games don't do stuff like that.
No.
And David, so kind of...
Even today, they don't do stuff like that.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And to what you said, David, too, like, I also, before that, Platinum Wild Arms 1, and going back and looking at it, like, I don't think RPG Maker was out yet, but, like, it almost feels like it was when you look at a lot of the assets that they were using, where I don't even know if this game was necessarily developed originally for the PS1, just because, like, you have that huge juxtaposition of, like, what battles look like and what the world looks like, and I kind of like the juxtaposition because it was neat at the time, you know what I mean, like 3D models, then like a 2D, but like you look at some of those 2D models and they look like stock images from what you might see in an RPG Maker, so it's like interesting to me, like maybe they didn't even have the skill set yet. So well, while we're here, let's just talk more about some of these features that we really liked in the series, because we're here anyway, and I think this is a really good place to like dig in on before we talk about anything else. Because Migrant Seals, we're saying check, this is great, like more of that. Yeah. What were some of those other things for you that were like, this is what made this series so special or was so great?
To me, it was the Migrant Seals. It was the Crest magic system.
Did you like that because of choice? Like, is that what it was for you?
I just thought it was just so cool. I just thought it was just so cool to be able to, like, create and develop your own spell. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And also, the freedom of choice, going on through and being like, you know, there's this one, I think it's called Rainbow in Wild Arms 1, where it's the only multi-target attack magic spell that you have in, like, the first normal crests.
Oh, Valkyrie. Valkyrie,
that's the one. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Valkyrie. Yeah. So I like to get, you know, the healing spell, the various elemental spells, and then that spell, and then I feel like I'm like super overpowered. You know what I mean? And then you can get other spells here and there and the other. But I just really like that. Unfortunately, though, they did. While they had great ideas, they also had some bad ideas.
Well, let's get to those later. Let's go dig more on some of the good ideas, because I do want to talk about bad ideas for sure too. Yeah. Okay. But let's hone in on some of these good ones, like tools. Period.
Oh yeah.
Tools, it gave such a unique idea for each of the characters and their identity on who they are, of like these items that they get to proceed through a dungeon. And like some games, what they'll do is like a character can do a thing, but I think you get so much more, and it's like, no, this puzzle requires for this person, like Jack, to use handpan, and then Cecilia to use the teardrop, and then you also have to bomb a few things too. Like, I just thought that was such a great creative way to just create an environment in a world.
Wasn't there one tower, I think it was called Tri-Pillar Tower, where the characters all split up and then you had to use their various tools to get through it and all that? Yeah. Like, there was just so many good puzzles in this game. And people
even just splitting up, right? Like, there, aside from Final Fantasy VI, I can't think of any RPGs where you're like, I think there's about 4 or 5 times where your party gets split up in Wild Arms 1, most of the time forcibly. And like, just to think like, I have to navigate this dungeon, which might seem frustrating, but it puts pressure on you. Like, Cecilia does not perform as well on her own than everyone else does, so like, how are we going to get through this?
I also like the fast draw system. You know, I liked how, whereas Cecilia, like, everybody gained their abilities in different ways, I guess. And the fast draw system was, not only did you gain them through exploration, because you kind of had to find like the little shrines or whatever and run them that way, but also the more that you used them, the more they kind of leveled up too. So I really did enjoy that as well. I just thought it was so good, so good, so good. The Guardians too, how all the Guardians, like, Phil Guy was a constant through the series. The Guardians were also a constant through the series. You know, they're the internal, they're the gods, they're the spiritual beings or whatever. And I just really enjoyed God, I could talk about this series forever. It's just so good.
So good. Yeah, I always felt Wild Arms did dungeons and exploration like a lot better than a lot of its peers back in the day, just due to the tool system and puzzles. Kind of like replaying a lot of PS1 RPGs kind of over the last few few years, I've kind of realized most dungeons were like kind of basic, kind of boring. A lot of like corridors, just not a whole lot going on.
You're literally just walking through,
like,
right?
Yeah, like some of them may be like visually interesting or something, but there's really not a whole lot to work with within the dungeon itself. So I really appreciate how much variety Wild Arms dungeons had, just with the tool system, the puzzles, and just kind of everything about them. It made like just traversing through not only the dungeons but just the world in general. You know, you have like obviously your airship in the first one, and there's that golem you can kind of walk across certain like terrain with as well.
Yeah.
So it kind of just made like just getting around your environment just, I don't know. I feel like Wild Arms just did that aspect well compared to a lot of other RPGs from back in the day.
Yeah, like you could compare it to Dragon Quest. I think it has a very similar structure where you start on like a small plane and then your scope of the world kind of expands depending on the vehicles that you did. And I think that's one of the cool things. I think Final Fantasy 3 did that as well, where like, you know, you start on your first little island and then you get your boat and then the airship and then it kind of goes on from there. And I think that's a really good way to not overwhelm players as they're playing through a game, because you're kind of like adding as you go, and now you can be like, oh, I remember seeing that cave earlier, now I know I can go to the airship and get there. And sometimes in games like the Wild Arms series, that's an extra dungeon that you can find something really cool in too. So yeah. One of the big things for me in the series that I don't tend to see in a lot of other games, and this started from 3 on, was bosses or enemies that required certain abilities or like tactics outside of just like a DPS check. And I really appreciated that. Like in Wild Arms 3, there's the turtle boss named Trask, and I think he's appeared in every single Wild Arms. Yeah, and like you have to cast a fire spell on him to like heat up his metal shell, and then you freeze it, and just like that would be in real life, like it cracks, and now all of a sudden his defense is just like null, it's gone. And I think and Wild Arms 4 was really good about this. One of like the things that game actually did well was some bosses, like there's this one guy that every time you attack him, he moves to a different hex grid, because he's supposed to be like the speedster really fast. So you have to get your characters like pin him in a corner, because then he can't escape to a different one. And I love that, because so many RPGs default to just being a DPS check. Like, my numbers are bigger than yours, and I will never run out of healing spells, so I'm going to win. And I think that's where a lot of the creativity in enemy design and boss design, like starting from 3 on, why the game was great for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a really underutilized concept. Just kind of like different elemental spells affecting that actual enemy's, you know, clothes or materials or whatever, stuff like that. Not a lot of RPGs really do stuff like that, so that would be a pretty cool mechanic to kind of see explored more, I think.
Even today, like,
sure,
if you want to lower someone's defense, you use a defense lowering spell. Like, you don't, you know,
hit him with fire, right?
Or whatever, you know, you don't do these weird, different esoteric things that you could do in Wild Arms. I remember there was this one guy who like lit his hair on fire. Yeah.
The Afro guy in Wild Arms 3. If you lit his hair on fire, he like couldn't counter. Or there's a boss that like if you steal from him, you steal whatever he needs. Or there's another boss where like you hit it with the light spell. I think it's an eyeball, and now like it closes or opens or something like that, and then you can do damage. Like those little things. I think the only other game series that like off the top of my head that had something very similar to that was Breath of Fire 3 and 4, where like you would see some of those enemies like, oh, that mud guy at the beginning of Breath of Fire 3, I need to cast an ice spell on him because it freezes him. And as a kid, like when you see those things, my mind like boom, like never saw something like that before. So it's just so much fun.
And I hate to say this, and I hate to beat a dead horse or whatever, but I feel no one's going to agree with me here, but I swear to God, it's God's honest truth. The HD generation ruined gaming. I'm just going to come out and say it. Because before HD, before PS3 came out and Xbox 360 and all this, like, you had these really cool ideas. You had these long games that lasted hundreds of hours that had world maps, and that had airships, and had tons of characters and tons of spells and tons of everything, tons of content. And now, because of the HD, you can't even make Final Fantasy VI. Can't even make an SNES game that came out in 1993 without taking 20 years to remake it. Like, it's crazy to me.
Preach, David.
It's crazy.
Get him.
So, like, all these great ideas that we're talking about that were introduced in the PS2 era, dead on arrival. PS3 era. They're still dead in the PS4 era. A lot of RPGs
went to die in PS2.
Yeah.
The second that the PS3 hit, RPGs died. And that was the Wild Arms series. It just died. One of the HD twins came out.
So many. Wild Arms, Grandia, Suikoden, like...
Yeah, why? I want to talk about that. Why do you think that is, though? Because, I mean...
because they weren't able to experiment anymore. Everything had to be, because it cost so much money to create these games now. They're not able to just go out and experiment and try new things and just be like, hey, this is a really cool concept, a really cool idea. We can chug this thing out for $100,000 or whatever it happens to cost. I don't know. I'm not a game developer. Beats the hell out of me. But like now it costs millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it's insanity. So now everything has to be a AAA must seller, and nobody can just experiment and try cool things anymore.
I think there's always a lot of
okay. I was just saying that they have to play it a lot safer now, just because so much money and time is going into it that they can't really afford to take that risk that they may alienate a lot of the potential audience. So they have to try to appeal to as many people as possible. But then that kind of creates like it could be still a good, fun experience, but it just may be, lacking in other areas, doesn't have that same level of, like, creativity or experimentation behind it as a lot of previous games from previous old
And
old
also,
systems.
I feel like they are hyper attuned to the complaining on the internet.
Yes.
They listen way too much to these whiners on the internet going on and on and on about, like, I can't believe that you reused the same enemy sprite, but you just colored him blue instead of red. Who cares? It's an enemy sprite that you encounter. It never bothers me.
So
I don't give a shit.
I might be team palette swap.
Whenever you're able to reuse a palette swap, then you're able to save time, save money, and then put creativity into how to deal with that cousin of the enemy by maybe casting an ice spell on it, or maybe blinding it, or doing whatever, because you're not trying to reinvent the wheel with every single frickin' mundane encounter.
So I think for me, the compromise on that is something like Octopath Traveler, where like you saw the monsters leveled up in the area that you went, and as the monsters leveled up per area, they visually just looked a little bit different. Like their sword might be bigger, or their spikes might be bigger, or you know what I mean? Like, so technically they're reusing the same asset, but you can see the progression, and that's something that I appreciated about that game. That I struggle with, because I mean, like, especially in a lot of RPGs, what's even worse is not only is it a palette swap, but now this boss is just like a souped up regular enemy. Like Bravely Default is very guilty of that. And I think older RPGs, like, they honestly didn't do that as much. I think some of the more successful ones, like, you didn't see regular enemies in Wild Arms popping up as bosses. Like,
no, never.
You didn't see that in Grandia. You didn't see that in Shadow Hearts.
Right.
So I think, like, I always wonder, like you're saying, like, where some of these complaints are coming from. But, like, you can still do some of these things that you think people are complaining about with integrity. So, like, I still think there's a caveat to that. Well, I'm sad that it's gone. I think it hurt me pretty deeply. I always wonder if it's just because Wild Arms 5 came out so late. And I feel like there was a huge argument that people thought that like, turn-based RPGs were dead. Especially going into the PS3 era, where, like, we didn't see a lot of turn-based RPGs on the system in its entirety. Like, I don't think we really got back to turn-based RPGs until PS4 era. So I'm wondering if they just kind of thought that, like, maybe this isn't a thing anymore. And then some of those ones that were, like, mediocre in terms of success, maybe not design but success, were cut. Like Shadow Hearts, boom, gone. Grandia, gone. Wild Arms, gone. Like we have to figure out how we're going to proceed and cut some of these losses.
Yeah.
It just seems like there was a big shift towards, like, gritty realism during the PS3 era, and like a lot of JRPGs didn't fit in that mold. They kind of just were too colorful or bright or something, you know.
I never watched the program, but I think it was called G4 or G-Force. Do you guys know what we're talking about?
Yeah.
It was like a TV show that people would review it. There was some bitchy girl on there who constantly complained about JRPGs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
David!
Probably.
What?
She was such a bitch! Talking about G4 was like the channel, but they had like different shows on there. You're probably talking about X Play, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never watched it.
that
I don't
sounds
know.
right.
But,
They
but
did
I've,
a lot
but I've
of
seen this clip
previews of
of
the
this
games.
girl just going on and on and on about how much she hated JRPGs, and I'm like, God. But,
On that show, yeah, on X Play, they talk shit on JRPGs a lot. They clearly didn't like JRPGs, so they had like an inherent bias against them whenever they would review them on the show. So it made it kind of hard to take what they say seriously because they just don't like the genre.
Right.
And I feel like
yeah.
maybe Japanese developers saw that and they thought, oh, all Americans feel this way about JRPGs, so we're just not going to make them anymore, or let's just have Final Fantasy take the reins, and you know how that turned out. So, yeah.
And that's a wrap on part 1 of this week's episode. We'll be back next week with part 2 so you can hear the rest of our gaming-related shenanigans. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode of RPGaymer.